Hello my friends, it's the Game Boy Geek here. Today, we find ourselves in the Streetfighter universe where you'll be characters like Ryu, Ken, Guile, Chun-Li, and others. You'll be fighting against your opponents using the Exceed fighting system. Exceed brings the speed, tactics, and variety of high-stakes fighting action to life where there are no packs to open or rares to chase down, and you get everything you need to play right in the box. Exceed Street Fighter is for 2 players, plays in 15 minutes, is for ages 10 and up, and is published by Level 99 Games. Today, we'll be doing a rule school, where I'll teach you how to set up and play the game so that you don't have to read the rulebook yourself. Now I've placed timestamps below me in the description of this video, just in case you want to jump to a specific section of the rules. Well, without further ado, let's get started. Exceed Street Fighter is a 2-player game that takes 15 minutes to play and brings the speed, tactics, and variety of high-stakes fighting action to life, and there's no packs to open or rares to chase, and you get everything you need to play right there. Each of the different sets comes with 4 of your favorite Street Fighter characters. Not only does each character come with cards that all the other characters share, but you also have your special attacks that you've known from the game and your ultra attacks. You'll be moving around the arena trying to get to the right range in order to strike the opponent with the right cards. You'll also be able to play boosts, which will give you an immediate effect or sometimes even affect your next strike. And every time you hit your opponent, you're building up gauge, which will allow you to spend those to do ultra attacks. You're also trying to be quick because the faster of the 2 strikes is the one that actually hits first, and sometimes stopping the other opponent from actually hitting you. And combining that with effects that happen at all different times throughout the attack gives you a deep strategy with simple mechanisms. To set up for the first time, each character is going to come with a tuck box that you'll put together, and you'll place all the cards for that character in this box to sort of separate them out. Now all the cards come in order, so they're easily set up, but just in case you need to know, here's all the cards that go in a specific character's deck. There's a total of 30 cards. Each character is going to have a character card, and they're going to have cards that are in all decks. So every character is going to share all of these cards that you see here. Now all 16 of these cards make up what's called the normal set, and they all have different sort of icons in the upper right. Then each character will also have a character set, and these cards will all have that character's face in the upper right hand corner of those. So here you can see the 10 cards that make up Ryu's character set, because there's 2 copies of each of those cards. And that character set is also made up of 4 Ultra Attack cards, which have a red border at the top and again has the character's face in the upper right. So those are all the 30 cards that will go in that character's deck. Next, you'll set up the play area by taking the 9 Exceed Fighting System cards that are brown and look like this and put them in one big row. Then each player will take their character card and place it on the 3rd from the end of the play area, leaving 2 empty spots to the end. Now, normally what will happen is the player that you're playing against will have their card facing themselves like this, but for the ease of the video and seeing what's going on, I've actually placed it like this. Now, when you place the character card, you want to make sure that it is the white side up, not the black and red side. We'll go over that later, but put the white normal side up. Now, to help facilitate the teaching of the game, I'm actually going to use the playmat. This does not come with the game. It's an additional purchase for $30 MSRP, but I'm going to use it because it will actually help teach the game a little bit easier. Now the game doesn't come with anything to track your life. If you're using the playmat, you can use any cube or anything that you want in order to track those lives. If you're not using the playmat, you can keep track on a piece of paper and pencil. So each player is going to take their 30 card deck and shuffle them. They're also going to get a player aid, which is going to show both the rules and some actions, and their character player aid, which shows the different special cards they have and what they do. Next, you're going to decide who will go first in any way you see fit. Then, both players are going to draw the first 5 cards from their deck, never showing any of these cards to your opponent, but looking at them yourself. Now, the player who's going second is going to draw an additional card. That player will get 6 cards instead of 5. Now, once you have your 5 cards in your hand, you can, once at the beginning of the game, use a mulligan to discard any number of these cards and draw back up that equal amount. So if we didn't want these 2, we could discard them out. We would draw 2 new cards, and then once we have our new cards, the cards that we discarded, these 2, would get shuffled back into this deck to create our draw deck. The object of the game is to reduce your opponent's life to 0. When you do that, you've won the game. Now turns are going to go back and forth between the two players, with each player, when it's their turn, taking an action and then drawing a card, unless of course you strike and then you don't draw a card, but most of the time you're going to be doing an action and then possibly drawing a card. So we're going to go over these different 7 actions, but since the name of the game is trying to damage your opponent, we're first going to go over striking in a very basic example. So here's a basic example of strike. The attacking player will place a card face down, and the other player will as well. Usually they do it in front of them, but I've got it close here to see what's going on. So then they will flip them up and we will resolve them. Now there's a few different things about these cards to pay attention to. First is range. Range is how far away you are. Right now, Ryu is 1, 2, 3 away, so this card doing 3 to 6 range works because it's within 3. Even if Ken was further back, that's range 4, and so it would still work. So what you do first is you look at the speed of both cards. The faster card, the one with the higher speed, will get to hit first. In this case, it's tied because both Ken and Ryu have a Hadouken. So in this case, it's tied. The attacker always gets to go first when speed is tied. And that attacker is going to do as much damage as the power of the card. This is 4, and so it's going to do 4 damage to this player. Now in this case, this player doesn't have any armor or guard or anything to block it or things like that. We'll go over that later, but in this very basic example, it's going to do 4 damage. And so this player would move their life tracker down from 30, which it started to, in this case, down to 26 because it did 4 damage. Now again, since this player didn't have any armor or couldn't guard it, anytime that happens and it gets hit, this player will be stunned, and that means that this player's attack will not be able to happen. Now there's other things that activate possibly in the cards themselves, but we're not going to go over those now. We'll do that later. This was just a basic example of a strike. Now if you did hit your opponent, the card you used will go in your gauge area, which is in front of you. We'll go over this later, but these cards are going to help you do more powerful attacks and spend force and different things like that. Now, if your card didn't hit the opponent, this will go in your discard pile next to your draw deck. Now let's show you another example. Let's say it was Ryu as the attacker again. They flip over their cards. Ryu had sweep. They're within range 1 to 3, and Ken is within range 1 to 2 as well. We look at the speed, of course, we have speed 2. So this one is going to go first, and it's going to do 6 damage. However, we see over here that you have armor. Ken has 2 armor. So instead of taking 6 damage, Ken would only take 4 damage. It's the power minus the armor. So it takes 4 damage. Now it also has a guard of 5. Now, we did 4 damage, and it's not more than 5. If it is more than this player's guard, that's when that player would be stunned and they would not be able to do their attack. But in this case, the armor brought this power down to 4 damage, and it's not greater than the guard, so this player is not stunned, which means even though the speed is slower, now this player gets to attack, and this player will essentially do 4 damage, but this player has 6 guard. So this player will actually take the 4 damage because there's no armor here, but it's not bigger than here, so it's not stunned, and stunning doesn't really do a whole big thing on the second player anyway. Again, we'll go over some of this other text later, but since both players were able to hit the other with those cards, both of these cards goes into that player's respective gauge pile. We're going to look at another type of attack. I'm still going to do it in a basic form, meaning I'm not going to activate any of the text on the cards, so I've purposely taken them off the screen. But we're going to do what's called an EX attack. Again, both players would have put the cards face down and then resolved them face up like this. Now, this player played 2 cards, and you can do that in what's called an EX attack, and it's when you have 2 of the same cards. So we have dive here twice. Now, when they're flipped up like this, one of these will go to the discard pile, but what this allows you to do is in the EX attack, you get +1 power, speed, armor, and guard. So this player has this. Now both of these are within range 1, so both of these check out. This is a speed 4, this is speed 5. Normally this would go first. However, because this has a +1 because it was an EX attack, it ties it for 5, and since this was the attacker, this will go first and they'll be able to do the 5 damage. There's no armor or guard, so this will do 5 damage, and this player, because they were stunned, will not be able to activate their card. Now another type of attack you can do is called a wild swing, and that's taking a card off the top of your deck and putting it down in front of you for your attack. So let's say this player did that. They did a wild swing, they put their top card down here like this, and then this player had already selected this one. Now look at this. This says range 1. This player is not within 1, so this card is invalid. Anytime you have an invalid attack, you put this in your discard pile and you perform a wild swing, whether or not your initial attack was wild swing or not. So this would get discarded, and we would place yet another card from the top of their deck on for a wild swing. So we say here, we go, oh wow, range 1, 2. Well, this one works. If this didn't, you would continue to discard and flipping wild swings onto your attack spot here until you had a valid attack. And once both players have a valid attack, then you would resolve the strike as normal. Now let's look at ultra attacks. Let's say Ryu is striking Ken, both players play their cards, and they flip them over. If it's a red border, that is an ultra attack. And you have to pay gauge. In the upper left-hand corner, there's a number there. It shows you how much gauge you have to spend. It's 3. And you saw we got gauge here by hitting the opponent. So we have 3 cards here. We will immediately discard these to our discard pile from our gauge in order to, create this attack and do this strike. Now, in the rare case that you actually did an EX Ultra attack, both of the same, you only have to pay the gauge once, but you'd still discard that extra card to your discard pile, and you'd still resolve the strike as normal. And also, if you reveal an Ultra attack from a wild swing that we just saw, you may choose to make this invalid in wild swing again. Now, there's other things you can do with gauge as well. Here, you could spend 2 gauge, for example, to flip this to the exceed side. Now, as an action, you could take what your character's action is. This says, as an action, you may move 1. So you could just move. And moving means you can move 1 in either direction like that. Now, you could spend the 2 gauge to flip this over, and now it's on the exceed side, and then as an action, you may move 1 and draw a card. So that's pretty cool. And again, at the end of your turn, you're always drawing a card unless you strike. So in this case, as an action, you could move 1 and draw a card, and then you'd still draw another card for the end of your turn because you didn't strike. Now, on either side of this, you'll see a 1 and a critical. Now what this means is when you set an attack, you can spend 1 gauge if you want to. So you could spend a gauge out from here, and that is telling your opponent that you're probably trying to do a critical here, but you could just spend that gauge to bluff that. But once this card is flipped over and you've spent that 1 gauge, then you can use the critical aspect of that card. Like for this example, it adds +2 armor. So you can add criticals by discarding gauge. It's another way to use gauge. Now you're doing 1 action per turn and then drawing a card unless you strike as mentioned earlier, but let's go through some of these other actions. To prepare, you essentially just draw a card, and then you draw a card at the end of your turn because you didn't strike. But if you have more than 7 cards, you must discard down to 7. Now to move, you must pay a force for each space to move, and you have to pay it if you're moving through the opponent as well. So if I wanted to move 1 this way, I would have to pay force. Now, paying force, if you discard a card from your hand, that is a normal card, or even one of your special cards that has your face in the upper right, that's 1 force. If you discard one of your ultra attacks, it's 2 force. And that is reminded on the back of this where on the rules, where essentially it says an ultra attack can be spent for 2 force. So if you wanted to move here and then through this character here, that would be 1, 2, so you'd have to discard a total of 2 force. Now let's talk about some of the other movements that can happen with some card effects. Like this one says, before you close 2. Now when you close, you move towards your opponent. This one says close 2. You only close up to the point where you are right next to them. You never pass them with close. So even though it said close 2, I don't go 1, 2 and skip over them. I go as far as I can. And if I can't go anymore, I stop like that. Now some cards say push. In this case it says hit, push. So if you hit the opponent, you have to push them 3. Let's say that was the card Ryu played. And if they did hit him, it pushes them 1, 2, 3, just like that. But let's say it was like this, and the card said pull 3. You'd pull the opponent towards you, 1, 2, 3, and it would move like that, and you can pull them right past you. And some cards might say retreat. In this case, it says retreat 3 after the strike. So let's say Ryu played that, it would go 1, 2, 3. And know that you can never wrap around the board. If you were to move more towards the end, you just stay there. Another thing you could do is advance. This is before advance 3, and if you move past the opponent, the attacker does not hit you. So advancing is you go towards the opponent, 1, 2, and to go past them, you spend another 1. So that would be 3, and you did move past the opponent, so in this case, they would not be able to hit you. Another thing you could do is change cards. To do that, you can spend any amount of force to draw that many cards. Remember, to gain force, you can discard any normal or special attack for 1 force or any ultra attack for 2 force. And you can discard them either from your hand or your gauge. So let's say we want to change 2 cards. Now you have to say how many you're changing before you actually do it. So let's say we spent 1 force by discarding a gauge, and let's say we did another force for this. You would then draw 2 cards from your draw deck into your hand, and then at the end of your turn, you draw a card because you didn't strike. So you'd get the 2 that you'd replaced, and plus the extra 1 because you didn't strike. Remember, hand limit of 7, discard down to that, always at the end of your turn. Another thing you can do for your action is to boost. Now boosts are the bottom yellow section of the cards. On the bottom left, it will tell you how much force you have to spend in order to play this boost. This one's 0 force, so I can just play this down in front of me, and this is a boost. This says I could just advance up to 3. Let's say I just wanted to advance 1, I'd be done. This would then get discarded. Now let's say instead of playing that one, I played something like this. Again, this one costs 0, and I would basically just add my card to my gauge. So this would allow me to, possibly set up for a more powerful attack later. Now some of these, when you play this one, has a plus sign. That means it stays. It's a continuous boost. This stays until the next strike, and it's going to add +2 power and +1 armor in this case, and it would stay in front of me. After my next strike, it would get discarded. Now some boosts, again, actually cost you force. You'd have to, again, discard 1 normal or special card in order to play this boost, but it's going to allow you to move 2 and then strike. And since it's not a continuous one, it would get discarded at the end of your turn. And some cards will say sustain, and that boost means it will stay there until your next strike. Like in this case, if you did not use a normal attack, you can keep that to your next strike. Now we've briefly talked about the different trigger effects throughout this tutorial, but let's go through them all in one spot. Before means essentially this happens right at the start of your attack before you check your range to the opponent. Hit only happens if you hit the opponent with the attack. After is it effects happens at the end of your attack after you've already hit or missed the opponent. Now happens immediately and is usually found on these continuous boosts, and cleanup is during the cleanup phase of the strike. Now at the end of resolving a strike, you'll go to the cleanup, and while you'll resolve any cleanup trigger words, you'll discard any continuous boosts unless they were sustained as previously shown, and again if you hit your opponent with that card, it goes into your gauge. You'll also perform any end of strike type effects, and these even happen if you're stunned, and then the turn will go to the next player unless you gain advantage, which means you get to take the next turn again. Now, if at any point you need to draw the last card in your draw deck, you will then shuffle your entire discard pile and make it into a new draw deck. Now, you can only shuffle your cards once per game. Also, for an action, even if you have cards in your draw pile, you can decide to take your entire discard pile, shuffle it together with your draw pile, again, assuming it's the first time you've done this in the game. Now, if you've already shuffled your draw pile once and you get towards the end of the game, and let's say you only have 1 card left and you need to draw a card, if you draw this last card after you've already shuffled once per game, you have lost. So again, you're taking turns back and forth until one of you gets to 0 life, the other player wins, or one of the players shuffles their deck once and runs out of cards. Well, I hope this helped you dive right into Exceed Street Fighter and get to the fun quicker than you normally would if you had to read the rulebook yourself. Now, if you have further questions about the rules, I've placed a link below me in the description of this video, and that's the best place to ask them since I'll be notified, but so will Level 99 Games.